is always good to be home. And if you are new at
Christ Church and you do not know me, I'm not surprised, because I'm one of those priests who's here unless I'm not. And my name is Brien Koehler. I've been away in Wisconsin, where for the spring and the fall months, my wife and I live at Nashotah House Seminary, and I'm chaplain to students there, and back home now for the winter months. Do you think there's any coincidence about which months I volunteer in Wisconsin and which months I maybe don't? That's all good until you find out also that we're here in June and July, which makes no sense when we could be in Wisconsin. So anyway, apart from all of that, how do we stay ready to serve Christ? That's the gospel question in this long series of gospel question sermons that we've had here. How do we stay ready? And you heard just now a group of bridesmaids ready for a wedding party who were caught off guard, at least half of them were, and missed the big event. And the word comes at the end from Jesus, the teller of the story: be prepared, be ready. You don't ever know when the opportunity is coming. You never know when the Lord is coming. This lesson fits on a Sunday now, close to Advent, and it's a kind of remnant of the days when Advent was not just 4 weeks, but was actually a 7 or 8 week season. Just like Lent, it used to run for 40 days. Aren't we glad that's not the case? Well, we pay almost no attention to Advent as it is, so a few extra days of a season we ignore wouldn't be all that bad after all, I suppose. But to the point about covenants today, because the Joshua reading about the covenant at Shechem shows Joshua and his family making a lifetime commitment. You remember the story goes, if you're not going to serve the Lord, says Joshua to all the tribes of Israel, decide today who you are going to serve. And then you make that decision and you stick with it. Covenants are permanent deals. And the covenants of the Old Testament, the new covenant of Jesus, are all represented as agreements between God and his people, where God undertakes certain things, certain responsibilities towards us, namely that he will be our God and we will be his people. And then the obligation on our side is to love and serve him without fear and without hesitation and without doubt. But that sometimes isn't as easy as it sounds. The bridesmaid story is interesting because it is focused around a marriage. And Christians consider marriage to be a bond and covenant. It says so in the language of our prayer book, that the bond and covenant of marriage was established by God in creation. And husbands and wives, according to St. Paul, show us a picture of what the unity between Christ and his church is like. That permanency of marriage, forsaking all others till death do us part, is meant to show how serious and strong and unbreakable the bond between Jesus and his faithful people is. Now, in our lives, our marriages are not always firm and unbroken. That's because the world is full of sin and shortcoming of every kind. But the fact is, there is a permanence about God's plan for us and a permanence about his relationship with us that shows itself in a husband and wife as they work together through all the good times and the bad. The vows in a marriage talk about things for better and for worse, and for richer and poorer, and in sickness and in health. I can tell you, having officiated at many, many marriages in my active years in parish ministry before I retired, I can't tell you how often I've looked into the earnest eyes of a young couple, and I think they're hearing the better part and ignoring the worse. I think they're hearing the richer and never admitting that there might be a poorer. and they're always looking for the good health and not thinking about the bad. Everything is balanced. But the point of marriage, the point of the covenant of marriage, the point of our covenant with God is that it doesn't depend on good circumstances to last. It is a call to love and serve the Lord, come what may. And I think that's vital for us to remember if we're going to be ready to love and serve Him, which is the theme of today's gospel question. What does it take to be ready? I think it takes being confident that God's love can be present and surround us in every circumstance. And that will take care of times of doubt and of times of sorrow and times of grief. I'm thinking particularly this morning about what happened at the very hour that our church was at worship here at 11 o'clock last week in Sutherland Springs. I have to confess, a town that I didn't even know where it was because I'm new in this region. But many of you have told me the same thing, that you didn't know where it was either. It's very small, out of the way. But while we were at worship here, praising God on All Saints' Day, there was something terrible happening there. And that those two things are juxtaposed, and God is in the middle of both of them, is really at the heart of what it takes to be ready to love and serve Him, come what may. I think one of the great weaknesses of many Christians is that we forget that God is there in every situation. Can you imagine the fact that Jesus Christ was standing in the middle of the terrible things that happened there? I'm speaking gently for the sake of the younger people who were here. But remember, if you will, Jesus is described by the prophet Isaiah in chapter 53 of his prophecy as a man of grief, acquainted with sorrows. It's important to remember and to help us be ready to serve in every circumstance that God calls us to and puts us in, the for better and the for worse, the richer, the poorer, the sickness, the health. It's important to remember that Jesus knows it all firsthand. His life began with the slaughter of innocents, designed as a move by the royal family of the day to try to wipe Jesus out. And then later, that same royal family, a successor king, killed the beloved cousin and friend, John the Baptist, of Jesus. There is Jesus' own violent death at the hands of sinners. All of these episodes of violence make him the man of grief, acquainted with sorrows. There is no doubt that he understands the pain. His family understood the pain. His mother knows what it is to lose an only son. So the pain of Sutherland Springs is shared directly by the experience of our risen Lord. And that should give us the kind of comfort and confidence that we need to know to be able to go and speak the word of light and truth and minister justice and mercy and compassion to those who need it. I'm very proud to tell you that in our parish family, that our parish church, several of our staff members and several of our lay members have been there involved in ministry this week. Our church has sent money, along with many, many others across the region and across the country, to help ease the pain and suffering in whatever way we can. And we've prayed here earnestly, day in and day out, as we look to try to make sense of something we cannot understand, but we are people who will look and not lose hope. That is the key to being ready to love and serve in any circumstance. Sometimes, when people are facing terrible situations like that, you'll hear them say things like, "Where is God in all of this? Where is God in this moment? Why wasn't He here with this?" It's like Martha in the gospel story from John about the death of Lazarus says, "Lord, if you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened." And Jesus goes on to simply say to them, as He weeps, deeply and grieves deeply for the death of his Son, that it is Jesus himself who is the resurrection, and that the last day is already present in him. That's the kind of person with whom we have relationship. That's who our covenant is with. That is our God, and we are his people, and he cares for us because he knows it and he understands it. I wonder if you heard some of the testimonies from people who were present at the church and survived, and other church members who were not there, but were able to speak to members of the press, members of the broadcast media and the rest. Their stories have been stunning to hear, because I haven't yet heard one of them say, "This has caused me to lose faith in God." Everyone that I have heard talks about the strength that has come to them and the confidence they have in the promises of Christ. At our other services, we'll be hearing a reading from Thessalonians that is St. Paul trying to address words of comfort and peace to a small church in Thessalonica that was dealing with trying to make sense of members of their church who had died before Jesus had come again. You know, the early church believed absolutely that Jesus would quickly return, and they became very alarmed as their loved ones began to die before this had happened. And St. Paul writes them and reassures them, and at the end, he says, "Comfort one another with these words." He's told them about the power of the resurrection, how we'll be together forever in the love and the peace of Jesus. And he says, "Comfort one another with these words." Sometimes I know pastors have trouble when they go and they try to speak words of comfort in times of deep grief and tragedy, because those words can sound hollow. But when those words come from those who are there and are part of the tragedy and are addressed back to us through newspapers and TV and the rest, and we hear them say, "My faith in the Lord is strong and stronger than ever," that's a wake-up call to us. That's saying to us, whatever doubts and fears and confusion we may experience in our own lives, here's the model of looking to Jesus, who stands in the middle of both the good and the bad times. Jesus promised that while we were in the world, we would have trouble. He says as much in one of the Gospels. But he goes on to say, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world." And there he stands in the middle of great sadness and great grief, the emblem of overcoming the world. That's the comfort that we give to one another, and it is carrying that confident comfort forward that makes the light of Christ come into the dark corners of this world. There is so much that can be said about how this all works and what could be done and what could be different. But for Christians, we've got to hold on to the fact that whatever our confusion and sorrow, the message is always the same. It is the message of triumph and resurrection and new life. Grief is real, but the gospel is up to the task. Yesterday, one of our speakers at a diocesan mission conference that was here reminded us that when Jesus sends out his disciples to become the great apostles and create the church at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, it's pictured in the window over here. When he sends them out, the Gospel reads, they went to where Jesus was and they worshiped him, but some doubted. This is just before Jesus is parting from his disciples, just before the Great Commission is given to go and make disciples. And Jesus' command to go and make disciples, go and serve in his name, go and love those for whom he died, is given to those who don't doubt and to those who do. We cannot let our own doubts or our own lack of understanding in the face of things that we can never understand keep us from speaking the gospel. That's what for better or for worse is about. That's why the union between Christ and his church is like a marriage. And happily, it's a marriage we've been called into and given a share of work. Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Comfort one another with these words. Amen.